My name is Quinn Lawson. This is a Conveyor Cast. We've been building out basically this program that focuses on hybrid between content marketing, thought leadership, and executive communications. We think that with AI creating this disruption in the world of attention and attention grabbing, that more than ever, executives, thought leaders, entrepreneurs need to focus on communication. So all of their stakeholders, all of the, not just their prospects and existing customers, but their employees, their investors, even friends and family in their network, because it takes, a village to launch and start a business. So I have here James Bates, AdVi Now Medical, AdVi Now
Medical. Yep.
Introduce yourself, James. Tell me a bit about your business.
Sure. My name is James Bates. I'm the founder and CEO of AdVi Now Medical. AdVi Now Medical uses artificial intelligence to completely automate all aspects of medical practices. So when you say automate all aspects of medical practices, a lot of people don't really know what that means. So if you think about going to a doctor's office, everyone has the front desk activity that as a patient you're very much aware of. But what happens behind the scenes is the nurse is trained to take a list of information from you and when you go into the triage room. And then from there, the doctor has a list of things that they have to get from you, dependent on whether you're a United customer or a Medicare customer or a Medicaid customer or an Aetna customer. And they are trained to take certain information from you, dependent on what you have wrong with you, who's paying the bills, and then what their practice type is. So AdVi Now automates all of that. We collect the information from the patient directly. We predict the illness to the doctor approves it. The AI scribes a note, codes it, and sends it out to billing. And it allows physicians to be physicians once again, where they don't need to worry about all of that other stuff. They can just worry about treating the patient.
I'm reminded of the Michael Gerber E-Myth book where, very good business owners, sometimes they get, not just business owners, but people who are craftspeople get weighed down by their bureaucracy or admin and lose, and sort of the thing that they love to do loses a little bit of luster. Is that sort of the, is that sort of your value prop that you put in front of folks who run practices?
It's a huge part of it. I mean, if you're an old guy like me, you actually remember going to the doctor before the time of electronic medical records. The doctor would sit with a pen, scribble a couple of notes into this chart that then gets filed in a wall, and that would be the end of their documentation. And so they didn't need to worry about all of the oversight of the insurance company, the rules associated with it. They didn't need to worry about getting sued if they didn't get the right note into the record. All of that stuff didn't really exist. And so doctors spent all of their time just treating patients and trying to do what's best for the patients. And the biggest complaint doctors have about their jobs today is that they can't do that. They spend all of their time trying to follow these procedures and rules, and so they can get paid and not get sued, and a little bit of their time trying to do what's best for the patient. And so it kind of has flipped everything on its ear, which really is making doctors quit en masse, actually, leading to a shortage of healthcare professionals, which is why it takes everyone so long to get an appointment with their primary care physician, and AdVi Now is really out to solve not only the doctor's dissatisfaction, but the patient's dissatisfaction in access to care, as well as improving those outcomes.
Sounds like there's echoes of what the experience is here in Canada, even though we have a different model for sure. A majority or many folks don't even have a primary care provider, so they have to go into walk-in clinics. And I can imagine that document, they're not actually fully equipped to make recommendations or help to see specialists. They just sort of put band-aid solutions on things.
Totally. When you don't have a longitudinal view of the patient, a long-term view over many years, then it's really hard to treat the patient appropriately. And if you don't have a primary care physician, because it takes you so long to get an appointment, or you have some queue you're in your region, there's no one available, then all of a sudden it reduces the probability that a doctor's going to catch something wrong with you before it becomes serious and you get hospitalized. So it actually increases the cost of healthcare. And it's one of the biggest challenges that not only Canada, but a big portion of the world has. In the United States, as an example, the least paid doctor is a primary care doctor, that general practitioner. In Canada actually has rules on how many patients a doctor can see per day. So your primary care doctor can see 20 patients a day. That's it. It doesn't matter how efficient they are. It doesn't matter what technology they use. The government says, we will only pay for you to see 20 patients a day. Well, what that means is it creates an artificial shortage of doctors. It eliminates innovation in the space, and it destroys the ability for doctors to treat patients effectively. And it's a very big problem in Canada. We have a number of people we engage with in the Canadian healthcare space, and the regulations have really just destroyed the whole industry. It's unfortunate. It doesn't need to be the way it is right now. Technology can fix a lot of that.
Such an amazingly challenging sector with so many problems and historical baggage related just to regulation and just the speed at which you can actually get new practitioners online, or the speed of change within the sector. It's remarkable. An area I'm not totally familiar with when it comes to my marketing practice, but something that definitely, with the Gray Tsunami retirements, being able to hire in immigrants or sort of finding outside of your region rather than education, new practitioners, and the challenges of accreditation overlap or reaccrediting people is really a big issue. Again, things that I know at a surface level, but can understand and appreciate from other sectors. So I think we're rounding the bend on understanding your specific focus area, your industry. Before moving on, could you maybe color from a business perspective the size of your business, staff, what sort of your current growth plans are, challenges, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, we're on a very quick growth path right now. We're going from a few $1 million of revenue to $30 million next year to over $100 million the year after that. It's a phenomenal growth path for us. We have some great partnerships in the marketplace, like Athena Health, Mayo Clinic, people like that who have evaluated the technology, love it, and are actually facilitating the usage by their partners. So we've really enjoyed some great success, and we're seeing that launch of that success. So I look at healthcare today, and I'm reminded by how this started. In my previous life, I used to run a $1 billion business in self-driving vehicle technologies, and it was great. We made the technologies that enables cars to auto brake and auto steer. We sold them to everyone from Google's Waymo to Tesla to Daimler to GM. 80% of the vehicles had advanced driver assisted systems technologies from us. It was a phenomenal business. We sold the business, and as an officer of the company, it was a good time for me to retire. And I could retire, but at 45, I like golf. I just don't like it that much, right? I can't play golf every day. I want to do something that's meaningful to the world. Money you could make almost doing anything as long as you work hard and you're smart about it. But making money and then making a difference at the same time, that's what I was looking for. And so I thought, healthcare is pretty broken. There's got to be something I can do. And so when I initially started looking at it, my first thought was I would just buy some medical practices, roll them up, and then manage them as a business, owning medical practices. Well, when I started to do the analysis, I quickly realized that the medical practices were not profitable. And as businesses, nobody would want to own them. I mean, the forward-looking data was all negative, and it just didn't make any sense. And I was just in shock that that was the case. And the unfortunate reality is this is not only true in the United States, it's true in almost every country in the world. And it doesn't matter if it's a single payer system like what Canada has, or it's the half single payer, half commercial, which is what the United States is, or fully commercial, like other countries. I mean, every single place where healthcare is done, it's broken. And the only people in the United States who are making money is the insurance companies, which you can extrapolate what that means, but it just is the reality. Hospitals don't make money. Doctors themselves individually make good pay. I'm not saying doctors don't get paid well, but the businesses they run are not profitable businesses. So when I saw that, I was shocked, but then also I had an epiphany of what has to happen to actually make that difference. And so in any business, if you're not making money in the business, then you don't have money to invest in the business, right? All you're doing is keeping the lights on, and you're working hard. It's a grind, and you're going to continue to do things the way you've always done them. Why? Because you don't have any bandwidth to do anything else. If you're not making any money, what are you going to do? And so I came in and I did a time and motion study. So what that means is I took a stopwatch and I measured exactly how long it took every single person in the practice when they were seeing a patient. And what I realized is that doctors were spending 60 to 70% of their time doing things that have nothing to do with their medical license. So if you think about that a different way, if you're running a factory and you have factory workers on the workflow, but then you have your inventor of whatever, widget that you're manufacturing, it's like taking that inventor and putting him on the assembly line for 2/3 of his day or her day. And so that's what medicine is doing. And it's not just America, it's doing it in every country of the world. And so we've created this artificial bottleneck on the industry by saying physicians are the only ones who can collect data and document data and fill out orders. I mean, and when you do this, you really create the situation that we're in. So that's when I first looked at it, I thought, man, this is an opportunity to truly make that difference. Because if artificial intelligence technology can come in, and the reason physicians do it today is not because people are stupid, it's because you need to have knowledge to do it, right? You don't need a license to do this stuff, but you need to have medical knowledge, regulatory knowledge. You need to have payer knowledge. You need to have a deep subset of information that's used to know what data to collect and how to document it. And until the advent of AI, there was no really other efficient person to do it other than the doctor. And now that has all changed. And so I came into this thinking we could take technology and take one of the most fundamental issues of our time, which is access to healthcare, and actually solve it.
That's incredible. Healthcare is such a diverse, talking about frontline healthcare and access is such a contrast to what I know is happening in the research field and what is happening with breakthroughs across the board with things like CRISPR, genome sequencing, but actually just talking about the mechanics of delivering frontline healthcare is a huge opportunity. And there's some funny ways, just in Ontario, they've downloaded some, let's say, consultations to pharmacists for some certain types of things. And so what I'm hearing is the same type of solution that I'm aware of as a consumer, as a person of the public, that is happening in Ontario. So how, let's have a couple discussions about your approach to business. You just shared that you built and exited a large, not in healthcare, but self-driving car. And that must have been deep tech, or that still is deep tech.
Sure.
In terms of high R&D, really high-end intellectual property, dealing with, let's say, monopsonies, so like only a few purchasers of the technology too, which presents its own challenges. How, without sort of continuing to go through what the business does, can you tell me about your philosophy through your experience around building businesses with people? I like the main core of my business is communications and content and casting a vision. And I want to share with people the actual mechanics of doing that. So can you tell me about how you built your business by bringing people on board and who you have to thank around that?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to build teams multiple times throughout my career. And so I guess I'll kind of walk through a little bit of my past history, and then I'll focus on a couple of examples. I think that might be helpful. So out of school, I joined Bell Laboratories, which at the time, back in the 90s, was a very storied research university. AT&T was a monopoly. The research center of AT&T was Bell Labs, invented large portions of the internet infrastructure. How the internet works today all came out of Bell Labs. Radar came from Bell Labs. Semiconductors came from Bell Labs. A lot of that core research actually came from Bell Labs. And so as an engineer out of school, I was really excited about joining this. It's like the dream job, right? And I was lucky enough to get that dream job. I think
there's a Canadian connection to that too, somehow.
100%.
Right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. So Nortel was actually connected in with AT&T back in the day. So if you go back when AT&T was a monopoly and how it engaged with the Canadian Bells, it all actually is connected.
Wow.
Very deeply. Cool. Yeah. And so I, as an engineer, I was just absolutely infatuated with it. But what I quickly realized is that AT&T spun out what was called Lucent Technologies, which was the manufacturing and tech development arm of the services, which was long distance services and local communication services. So they've separated the services from the technology development, and we were with the technology side. But before the technology side, all they could do was do what the services guy told them. What equipment are you going to build? What switch, back when they had phone switches, what switch are you going to create? What internet router, what IP system you're going to create? Well, the system, the services guys would put a definition together, and then the equipment guys would just build it. Well, after it split, all of those guys who defined stuff stayed with AT&T. And the whole idea of the new guy, this new company, is that it would be able to sell equipment to more people than just AT&T, right? They wanted to sell it to Sprint or Verizon or whoever is these other companies. And that was the whole thesis behind the split, right? It would expand its market potential. But the problem is that we had a bunch of engineers who actually didn't know how to read markets, didn't know how to create products. They knew how to develop products, but they didn't know how to define really what was required. And so what I witnessed initially is that the company Lucent Technologies started hiring a whole bunch of young MBAs, had a relationship with Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania, and a lot of young MBAs started flowing into the organization who could follow spreadsheets. And great business people knew nothing about technology, right? And so what we ended up with was a massive clash of cultures. And what I realized at that time, and this is going to lead me throughout my career on how I build teams, is that, you have to hire for smart, but then you have to hire for attitude next. And then you hire for experience. Not that experience isn't important, but it's all about first intellectually smart. You gotta be smart. But more important than experience is your attitude of how you're approaching the problem. And what we saw was a huge conflict of these really young guys who would come in and say, I learned this in Wharton. This is how I'm supposed to do it. This is the cost structure. You engineers, you're stupid.
Well, even back then, they don't have there was not even a language around launching a new product. Like, I bet just at the time, Clayton Christensen was just starting to be a thing. I bet people were reading Andy Grove. And so there was some sort of like management level understanding around new products and hardware. But what I'm picturing are business MBAs coming out, and they're really good at modeling out nationwide supply chains, but not entering a market effectively and understanding what, that crossing of the chasm from early adopters to to new
how
people.
Do you innovate? How do you model innovation? And how do you actually forecast adoption in a market that doesn't really exist?
Mm-hmm. And then the engineers, if you're dealing with Bell Labs, and there's a lot of institutional knowledge around relationships for bringing new hardware to market, then you don't really need to work within teams that think about early commercialization, because that happens in other boardrooms, other meetings.
Exactly.
And so baking in R&D and hardware, which I mean back then and even now is so complicated that you need to be able to test and iterate with market development as much as like research and development.
And they didn't know how to do that, because the AT&T systems group used to just give them the definition. They didn't care if it sold well. They just did. Their job was to execute on what was given to them. And so now we had guys that didn't really understand technology saying, wow, if we invented this wonderful dream thing, we invented the flying car, boy, wouldn't that be cool? Well, creating the flying car and getting there has to happen before you can sell the flying car. And that gap between the vision and the actual technology development and that communication between those organizations, I witnessed really detrimental things. And today you look out there, Lucent Technologies doesn't really exist today, right? Bell Labs doesn't really exist today. And it's a shame that it doesn't, but this is why it doesn't. And so when I left for a startup in 2001, I left Bell Labs and I joined a startup company named Silicon Labs. And my job was to found the international operations for them. And, I had a deep understanding of technology because I was an engineer. But I'd also been doing business development within the Bell Labs infrastructure and this new marketing organization. I was a technical marketing was my official role. And my job was to take technology from the labs, find external partners, and then create a business case for it. Well, in the international operations side, I was able to go and wonderful technologists, most of the founders of Silicon Labs actually came out of Bell Labs. And I was able to work with them to define products that customers, and I was living in Japan at the time, so mainly focused on Asia, that customers in the Asia region really wanted. And so having that impact and be able to define the products, create the relationships, the trust, to be able to turn those products into revenue was just an amazing opportunity. So when I joined the startup, I had to build a team. I was employee number one. So that means that I need to go out and find people who I can build the team with. Well, I lived in Tokyo. I need to hire a China country manager, a Korea country manager, a Taiwanese country manager,
What
Singapore.
year was
This was in 2001.
Okay.
And it was just starting down that journey, and I initially tried to find people who had deep experience. Maybe they worked at Motorola or Intel, or maybe, they had big company experiences. But what I quickly realized after I hired these guys is that they had ways in their mind of the way they wanted to manage and do things, which was incompatible with small company, move fast, execute, and essentially course correct if something starts going wrong, right? And it turned out that I had a much better job hiring people who were highly intellectual, who could infer things and get it right maybe 80-90% of the time, but they hadn't been there, done that yet. So they're going to get it wrong some of the time, right?
Resilience, high resilience as a
but they're
trait.
able to overcome the fact that they're going to screw up. That resilience, exactly. And those are the people that I found to be most successful. And we were able to grow the business at Silicon Labs from $0 to $500 million of revenue within just 3 years. And it was a phenomenal growth time.
That's incredible. You're bringing up some other things. So I work with a deep tech venture capital firm, and they've kind of hammered home the idea of technology readiness levels, which I'm sure, there's it's called TRL. I think it's from NASA. And so it's about deep R&D, not quite commercial ready. So think of like quantum computing or something like really far out there, space elevators, whatever, just extremely innovative without a clear purpose or intent yet. The next one, as you go further up the level, I'm not going to pretend like I know the specifics, but there's like commercial pilots. Like, is this economically viable? Does this solve a real, market challenge? And then once you validating that, and then you go further up the level. And I think it was originally invented by NASA. And so you've touched on in a few different ways the challenges of R&D, basically crossing each of those readiness levels and working on not just getting something into the market, coming up with case studies, but even just the team that's required when you have an organization with heft around it. And then even dealing with cross-cultural compatibilities, because I know that notoriously Japanese culture is not very big on entrepreneurship, which means that entering a market would be quite a challenge. And even probably 25 years ago, it must have been the nadir, how do I even say it? Nadir of Japanese sort of being the big scary economy outside of the United States, right?
Yeah, the Japanese were going to take over the world there for a while.
Yes. Tell me about your communication. So tell me about so one thing that I really emphasize is that folks should be really considering all of their stakeholders at a lot earlier stage. They generally do, and successful business owners usually do this passively, or very good managers tend to do this, in that they humbly lead from the front, and that they take they pass on the credit to their people with wins, and they own failures. They see sort of asymmetrical or ways to connect the dots between their previous networks in order to launch their new things, and they're just constantly staying engaged and networking and participating in their like area of focus, whether it's an industry or their local business community, and allowing luck to happen relationship wise. So how do you treat communications? How have you done that traditionally? Do you send internal emails to your team? Do you have investor memos as you're going through this giant growth curve right now? Tell me about comms in general as a business leader.
Yeah, so there's three types of comms, and you actually I've managed them differently throughout the different positions that I've had, and also the different size of companies. They do change, and the methods change. So I'll kind of talk through what the three communication circles are, and then how I've evolved over my companies. So the first one is team communication. Ultimately, you have your close team. These are people who report directly to you, although they don't need to report directly to you. They're essentially the management team. They're the ones that you rely on to run the different operational aspects of your business. And that's a daily, multi-times per day communication. And within that communication, there is one-on-ones, which are very important and critical. But then there's also team communications where you're talking to everyone at the same time, because how people act in one-on-ones and how they act in teams, in team meetings, actually is not the same with people. And you ultimately want it to be the same, right? You want to create this oneness of the team. And if they act differently in a group of their peers rather than they act with you one-on-one, then that's usually not a good thing. That means there's something going on that isn't clear communication between you and everybody else, right? And so what I would do is I set up weekly one-on-ones with everyone who's part of my team or management circle. And then we have team stand-ups daily, just a call. 5 minutes, right? 5-10 minute call. And this is where we get in and we talk about what's being delivered, what we did yesterday and what we're doing today and what we're going to do tomorrow. And it doesn't need to be more than that, right? It's not a solution meeting. It's not anything like that. But what that does is it creates accountability of not only you, but the whole team on what you're actually going to go execute on. And if it turns into, oh, I'm going to go sell things like I did yesterday, and I'm going to go sell things tomorrow, that's not what we're looking for, right? You want specifics, and Elon Musk became very famous about writing his email saying, tell me what you did last week,
what did
right?
you do last week? Yeah. Yeah.
But the reality is that is the key communication that you should be having with your team members. Now, I would never send that out company-wide. I mean, that is probably a communication that belongs with you and in your direct team. But ultimately, that type of accountability and that type of communication is critical. So that is the team level communication. Then you expand that and you'd say corporate communication. This is communication out to all of everyone in the company, general communication. And when your team is small, then a general communication and your team communication is actually not that different, right? You're expecting it to be somewhat similar. But, I had 1,000 people that were in my reporting chain in my last life, and there are so many different types of people, types of individual, types of job functions in that 1,000 people group that it's not the same communication you have with your team and you have with everyone else. It just isn't. And if it is, then probably there's going to be some miscommunication, hurt feelings, problems, like we saw with Elon's little, tell me what you did last week type of message. Not that his message was wrong. I don't think it was. I think everybody should report to their boss what they did. But it's not something that comes from somebody who you don't have that personal relationship with. And so that type of communication is vision. It's this as a group, this is what we accomplished. And I would have these quarterly, I've had them monthly, and even had them weekly when we had very critical timelines that we were outgoing. It's a short meeting. Half of it is rah-rah, hey, we're wonderful, we're great, we're changing the world, blah, blah, blah. But the other half of it is very operational. This is what we did last week. This is what we're going to do this week. And this is what we're going to do the next week. And then the next week you meet. We said we were going to do this. This is what we actually accomplished. And this is what we're going to do next week. And you continue to have these meetings. And as an organization, it allows people to get on the same page for something that is important for the corporation to accomplish. And I've found that to be extremely effective. And when you don't do that, right? And a lot of executives don't, quite frankly, and this is probably to their detriment. At least I found it to be my detriment, in my career. Then people start interpreting what you're doing without actually understanding what you're doing. So, and I'll abuse Elon again, because it's in the news every day. What he's doing is trying to eliminate waste and fraud in the federal government, which, by the way, is a wonderful thing. But that's not how people are interpreting it. Oh, I'm doing my job and he's just going to fire me anyway, right? He just wants to get rid of everyone and, he hates me, or, he wants to shut down all the grants. He wants the government to be zero employees. So they start imagining what is happening instead of somebody defining with a plan of execution in a detailed format about exactly what's going on. And it's really unfortunate that, that hasn't happened in our federal government, but it also hasn't happened in most companies. That vision of execution and plan from the senior leadership down so everyone can get on the same page. When you don't have that, everyone starts guessing, bringing up their own conclusions, and it sows chaos, seeds of discord, and leads to lower inefficiency in execution and overall poor performance on the job.
There was a really good post by a fintech that raised a bunch of money in Toronto here recently. And one of the posts that he put out was about communicating to his team what this new fundraise meant for them, saying that this isn't a payday. This is not a, that this isn't, a mark of how far we've come. It's about where we are going. It's about where we have to go. And things will be changing, but you've all brought us here. And so it was a really nice highlight around the proactive setting of the culture and aligning on an understanding around actions, environmental changes, things like that were happening. It was a small company, but very impressive with a lot of potential. And so sort of like I'm thinking almost like a military, I kind of hate military references in business, but like the idea of like the order, or like sort of like getting to attention, like you are reaching out across organizational hierarchies horizontally and just sort of commanding attention on a certain, everything from how we do HR, like how does vacation policy work here, to what does this acquisition or merger mean for us, and what is going to change or stay the same. And that's the second circle you said, which is corporate. So what is the third circle?
Your clients, your external to the company, the face that you're putting on to your customers, the communication you have with your customers, communication you're having with the media, communication you're having with anybody who is outside the company. And that is the third circle. And it's very interesting. I've had the opportunity to go through 2 turnarounds. That's where you're taking a company that's struggling and you go through some pretty significant structural changes as you're working. And that external communication becomes very, very important, right? As a startup, your external communication is all about how great we are. We're bigger than you think. We're taking over the world. If you don't work with us, you're missing out, right? You're trying to create the FOMA, right? The fear of missing out. As a startup guy, and me on your podcast, this is part of my job, right? From an external communication standpoint, this is that third circle. And my job is to make sure everyone knows who I am and loves the technology, loves the vision, and thinks, man, I want to work with them if I'm going to miss out, right? And so that's your job as a startup. Your job as a large company, and I've had large company opportunity, right? Operating large companies, is we're stable. We're the one you trust. This is why you work with us. We take care of the people who take care of us, right? And you giving that sense of stability and that sense of candor. And that's why, and again, I'll go back to, since it's so prominent in the news, everything going on with Elon, but that's not what our federal government is putting out there right now, right? And so our customers may need to know that they're going to be taken care of. And so as you're going through it, if you are a large company that's struggling, that's going through turmoil, then the communication you have is, this is short-term pain. We understand what our function is to service you, customer. This is short-term pain, and this is what comes after that short-term pain, which is better for everybody. And that type of communication, which goes into that third circle, becomes almost more important than the other communications, because if you don't have your clientele going with you, then even if you have the best products in the world, they're not going to buy from you. But at the same time, if you only do the third circle and you don't have your employees going with you, you really got to do all 3.
100%. That's funny because the logo, you can see it in the picture here, community company. It's this notion of, it's a community. You have to think very outside of the box around every single stakeholder. And in the world of AI and attention deficit, like capturing people's attention, totally, you have to think very core about who you need to stay in front of, who do you need to stay top of mind of, what is the one thing, not too much, not too little, that you want people to remember right now related to what your objective is in business, in the work that you're trying to accomplish. And so that idea of sort of the CNC, it's like not quite closed, it's not quite open completely, it's in motion. And it was wonderful that you brought up 3 circles. That's good. That's perfect.
It matches your little circle there perfectly, huh?
Exactly. Just need a third one, I guess.
Well, you have the outside, the middle, and the inside, so it's almost the same.
100%. Let's talk about actual, talking to new people in your business, achieving objectives with your new people. Let's talk about sort of customers and prospects. How do you get people to trust you? Talk mechanically about how you get people to trust you. Do you have playbooks that have worked throughout your career, or something particular related to Abby now? How do you overcome that initial stage so that you can get close and actually make business happen?
Yeah, and so I'll use the three groups scenario again, because you're actually the way you get people to trust you is to actually build relationships of trust, and how you build that relationship varies depending on which circle you're falling in. I mean, so for your team, your individual team, those one-on-one times, taking them out to dinner, a game, spending personal time, getting to know their families, getting to know them as individuals, it's key. And, I don't know how anyone can have a team member that trusts them without fully knowing them as a person. And so I spend a lot of time, and when I'll use the example when I did the startup when I lived in Asia with Silicon Labs, I hired people in every country. Well, what did that mean for me to actually build relationships of trust? We went from 0 to over 200 people in the space of 3 years. And I needed my team members to fully execute and trust that we were doing the right thing, right? And how did I do that? Well, it meant I was on a plane a lot. Phone calls don't do it. Zoom calls, they don't do it. You really need to go and spend the time with them, become friends, compassionate with their needs, their wants, their worries, and then put them at rest. Say, I'm here to take care of you as long as you take care of me. And that reciprocity, that relationship that you build as a human is really what makes the difference with your individual team. Now, building relationships as a leader of a company, where you have thousands of people that are in your reporting line, that's different. And you can't go pound the flesh with every single person. It just doesn't work, right? It's not possible. So that's where the open communication about exactly what you're trying to achieve and what the plan is and what your actions actually mean, people won't believe it once. I mean, I did a rebuild at a company called Freescale. It was a spin out from Motorola Semiconductor. And this was I had 1,000 people in my direct reporting line, and I was responsible for about 10,000 people who were in the Arizona area. So I was the head executive in Arizona for Motorola. I wasn't the CEO. I was I was an executive VP, and about $1 billion business. And I had to get everyone to trust me. But the problem is that Freescale was taken over by private equity in 2006 at the peak of the stock market. By 2009, they had lost 50% of their revenue. They'd gone through layoffs and they'd fired everything and sold everything they could. Private equity was losing its shorts. It was a leveraged buyout. Was not going well, right? They hired me in 2012, right when we're coming out of the downturn, growth is starting again. And my job was to come over here and get everyone on board, make sure we had the right people in the right seats, the good old get people on the right bus story. And when I came in, the level of distrust from the general population against any senior management was huge. And the board and the CEO, a guy by the name of Greg Lowe, who is a great guy, by the way, and the board were actually very well attuned to this. Because when I first took the job, I was living in Palo Alto, I was living in the Bay Area, and I wanted to commute to Arizona. And they came to me and they're like, no, James, you have to move. And I'm like, no problem, I'll get an apartment. And they're like, no, you need to move your family. Your family has to go to local schools. Your wife has to be involved in the local community and you have to be there. And I fought it at first. I was like, oh, my oldest son was a freshman in high school. And, and I was like, how do you win the worst dad of the year award? Move a kid in high school. You'll win that award. Right. And I fought it, talked to my wife, somehow convinced her to support it. And we moved, we pulled the trigger. But once I got out here, I realized why the level of distrust was so high, because they had commuting executives for years, for the whole private equity, time from 2006 until I joined in 2012. For 6 years, they had 6 different senior execs at my level. Each one came in with its own strategy, which was somewhat disjointed. Nobody supported. And so the status quo was, we'll just wait them out. So that alignment never happened with any of them.
So you come in with a big bluster, you kind of cast a big vision, you know, some people might buy in for a little bit, but as soon as you hit some resistance, you're otherwise, because it's private equity, I bet a bunch of the executives, or, you know, it was a tour of duty, or the managing directors are otherwise engaged, which is a classic, you know, that it's 3 or 4 portfolio companies they're dealing with. And so you're not one of them. You're not making them feel like, you know, the relationships are, and it's funny you brought up that you had to move. So I always say relationships are local, and tying in what you're talking about with your core staff who you report to, you have to know each of their idiosyncrasies, what their motivating factors are, and it's not using my NFT term. It's non-fungible. You cannot. They are unique people with unique thumbprints in and of themselves, and so yeah, being. You're bringing up a great point, because one of the things that I do with my agency is I try to scale up individuals' thought leadership, but more just their insight-driven expertise. So just cast their expertise, everything that they're doing really well, just be a extra appendage for them that they can use to motivate and work with all of their circles. There are 3 circles, and deeply intertwined is the message, but also how you get the message out there and how you make people feel. And in fast moving sectors, but not even the best analogy is for like a fast moving technology sector. So if you are in quantum computing, you have to eat, sleep, and breathe that sector, because the depreciation on the information you're sharing, and not only that, the way that you are talking about it is so incredibly high that you have to live and breathe it. And so when I work with clients, I help unpack what really is important, to take a second and be like, not everyone knows this. Let's tell more people about this, because you are going to further cement yourself as someone at the center of this world as it's unfolding, and build more trust as a result. You might not have all the answers. There might be so many questions related to quantum computing, but we're moving inches and inches, and then last week felt like a year type of thing. So there are just things that move the market and fundamentally shift sectors, and being the leader who has that open door policy is incredibly important. The challenge is sometimes the leaders like to be the builders, and they're not necessarily the communicators, even though they exude all of the qualities when they're nudged in that direction. And then sometimes it's hard to be consistent, and just being, and it's being really good to managing all of the multiple priorities with incredibly different timelines means that the consistency is a barrier to the level of trust you're capable of developing, and cementing, and getting that little bit of extra out of your circles, out of your team. And it's something that doesn't always work with every client, but boy, when it works, are we a really good team working with folks on scaling up their comms and sort of casting out what they need to get done, big and little. Does any of that sort of, so have you worked with, probably in the much larger organizations, have you worked with sort of PR teams or internal comms teams? What are you doing now with your startup? What's different about it?
Yeah, I mean, in my larger company roles, there was an internal communications team, an HR team, and then an external marketing team. And so there were large teams that we engaged with for all of those. In my smaller company, it's no teams, just me. And so, our company's a relatively small size. We have a team of about 30 people. So it's not a big team. And so I just handle that all myself today. Hopefully, we go through this rapid growth phase that we're going through over the next year, and we'll be growing to the point where that's necessary.
Is there, really appreciate all of the time, really great perspective. What a rich history that overlap with so many things I'm interested in around technology. Just hearing about Bell Labs, like that's a historically relevant organization. I'm usually pretty patriotic, but I'm like extra patriotic lately, so hearing about sort of the uno reverso of Nortel and Bell Labs is really funny around the governance of that organization. And other than that, just I can tell that you're a fantastic leader, that probably pretty good servant leadership with like helping lift up other people and lots of teams, and have had really good experiences as a result of that. So is there anything else maybe that you want to add, or sort of any advice for any listeners here?
My only advice would be, nobody gets it all right the first time, right? And there will always be a miscommunication problem. There will always be some type of interpersonal problem. There will always be the client that you piss off, right? Within your 3 circles that I was referring to. But you can always repair it. And the repair many times is 100 times harder than doing it right the first time, but it's always repairable. And so one of the biggest failures I see leaders make is, well, I screwed that up, and then they just ignore it and continue down the path thinking that persistence and stubbornness is going to get there. But I've really saw my own self as I've gone throughout my career morph how I do my communication, and be able to customize it, get the team on board, get the internal company on board, and then really be able to project something to the market that is real and it's purposeful. It's not something that happens by accident. It's something that you plan for. And so all leaders need to keep that in mind. It's never too late, and plan for that communication and that culture, else it will not happen.
Kim Scott in Crucial Conversations, I have to be so mindful of getting my facts right on the right now that I'm publishing these. So she says the conversation is the relationship. So if there is ambiguity and you are the leader, then what I've learned is it's your responsibility to say the thing. I've also, another thing that I picked up on is so one anecdote for me. So I'm trying to hire a writer for a client. So this is a very domain specific fintech writer that would be a great fit both operationally and subject matter wise. And I tried to pitch her, and she's like, you know what, I'm doing my own thing. After talking to you, it was a really good conversation. I'm doing my own thing. It's not quite a fit. And it was the first chat. So I was disheartened and I walked away. And then a couple hours I came back and I said, how do you know it's not the right thing? I haven't even put the proposal in front of you. What do you, what
would make it the right thing for you?
Yeah, what would make it the right thing? And then she said, it's really nice that you challenged me on this rather than being dismissive and moving on. And so I was just like a very minor, the conversation is the relationship type of thing. And I really did like how you said, get your ducks in a row with your team, focus on projecting out into the world something that is real and purposeful, which I think is the right order of operations and something that is very thoughtful, and a really good approach, because I think that there's a lack of trust broadly in the market. And so knowing that you shore that up starting from your inner circle on the way out is a really good defensive and offensive thing to do as you try to do anything meaningful in your career. Really solid.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks a lot, James.